on my personal behalf, to warmly welcome our esteemed panelists and thank them for having accepted our invitation to this panel to share with us their analysis and insights flowing from their remarkable expertise and vast experience in the subject of this panel. I will naturally be introducing each panelist respectively before giving them the floor. Let me also welcome the participants, who I see are, as Florian has just mentioned, now over 60, coming from all parts of the world. It is very encouraging to see your interest in this subject of vital importance for the future of society. As a matter of general practice, the moderator of a panel such as this offers opening remarks to introduce the topic. However, with a view to gaining time, I have chosen instead to present a short 1.5 minute, 90 seconds video whose captions mention what I would have wanted to say. And the video is definitely far easier on the eye and the ear. Gloria, the video, please. Thank you.
Over to you, Umesh.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that short video in which we said certain things that I wanted to say in the introduction. So thank you for watching. I will now open the panel and would like to reiterate at the outset that the time allotted to each speaker is ideally 8 minutes, but it can go to 10 maximum. This would allow all panelists to make their presentations during an equal length of time and leave some spare for a brief Q&A session, thereby ensuring that the entire panel event stays within an hour and a quarter. With that, allow me to call upon our first panelist, Her Excellency, Lubna Qasim, Deputy Permanent Representative of the United Arab Emirates to the United Nations Office at Geneva. Her Excellency Lubna Qasim was appointed as the UAE's Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN and international organizations in Geneva since 2019. Mrs. Qasim joined the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation and served as Senior Legal Counsel to the UAE's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. After a span of 20 years of successful career in law, trade, economy, finance, cross-border acquisitions, and international dispute resolution across Europe, US, Asia, and the Middle East. She speaks 6 languages fluently and is recognized by a number of international organizations for her leadership, diplomacy, and legal intellect. Lubna Qasim is a recipient of a number of international and regional awards, including the IFRC, who chose her in 2018 as the best general counsel of the Middle East. She was also recognized the same year as one of the top 50 female leaders in the Arab world. It is indeed an honor for the Geneva Centre to have you, Excellency, in this panel. Could I, just to direct the panel discussion, ask you to elaborate on a couple of issues in your statement? Naturally, to talk about the effect of the pandemic on the right to education, the UAE's efforts in safeguarding access to education and education as such, the quality education during the pandemic, and how do you see the role of human rights as a legal framework to mitigate the long-term effects of the pandemic on education? Over to you, Excellency.
Well, thank you very much, Amish, for the kind introduction. I, of course, cannot start without thanking the Geneva Centre for Human Rights Advancement and Global Dialogue. It's such a pleasure to be among all of you all today and all my fellow panelists. And what great questions, Amish. So thank you for those questions. Well, as we all know, COVID-19 has caused unprecedented crisis. Sadly, it has impacted on children's right to a quality learning to more than 1.6 billion boys and girls around the world. And what is very regretful is that it's expected that 23.8 million students may drop out completely by the end of the pandemic. Now, there's a real risk of a loss of generation of children never returning to education, and even those who will never return will experience significant learning loss. In the absence of any perspective to raise the pandemic, at least for the near future, the huge challenge ahead all of us, all governments and private educational institutions, is to devise alternative ways to access to education before even considering whether a reopening of school can be envisaged with or without a pandemic. The severity of this pandemic, as we have all experienced, has disrupted all walks of life. It has been so rapid, so damaging. It has not left any time for many of the educational institutions around the world, whether public or private, for any readiness, any anticipation to save or safeguard the right to education, which was one of the main sectors which suffered the most. It is, if you don't mind, I would like to even raise issues which may have direct impact on the right to education. And that is the children, which actually risk the contamination of this virus, which is contagious in turn, and with their capacity to resist to the new emerging variants, and whether the vaccination program currently dedicated to adults can be feasible on children. And are scientists envisaging a specific vaccine for school children and youngsters? These are, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, prerequisite questions that may affect an adequate schooling and should be addressed in priority or simultaneously when discussing the issue of education. And to your second question, Amish, thank you very much about raising UAE's efforts. UAE, humbly but very proudly, I want to share that introduced prompt and effective measures which were taken drastically to upgrade its internet speed and coverage to ensure all 1.2 million pupils and students could continue their education online when COVID-19 broke out. So when the cases of coronavirus were slowly beginning, the government acted very quickly to instate distance learning for schools and universities. Now, UAE was in a very fortunate position and well prepared for distance learning because of smart learning initiatives, which the UAE invested in since 2012. UAE has a solid base to build a scale model And it was very impressive. I mean, I was sitting here in Geneva, and it was very impressive to monitor how the stellar infrastructure in UAE was able to shift 1.2 million children on a virtual platform within 2 weeks. And the country also developed a satellite operation to ensure pupils across the country, especially in some of the rural areas which didn't have internet speed or internet. There were free satellite services which were set up for pupils, and they could also continue their education around 24/7. And one thing that is definitely worth mentioning is actually we increased internet speed by 100%. And again, it was all about the prompt, effective decisions, which as much as we could, we didn't want to disrupt the children's education, which is one of the key priorities of UAE. And then, we can't be in Geneva and not talk about what can human rights do to mitigate the long-term effects of the pandemic on education. So I really very much want to share that it's a very essential question, and it should remain in force during and after the pandemic, especially at a time when the bulk of responsibilities related to education is shared between governments, precautionary measures, parental choice, and school authorities. From a human rights perspective, it looks quite natural that some duties go beyond these traditional stakeholders and fall within the boundary of international actors because of the significant impact on a wide range of children's rights. And of course, by way of example, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which should be commended here for its efforts in providing states with guidelines on protecting the rights of their citizens, including children, while combating the pandemic. These guidelines have the merit of drawing states' attention on the negative impact of COVID-19 and on the right to education of children, namely in terms of discrimination, violence, the right to health, to cite only these as few examples. It is also very important that the special procedures continue their task to ensure that governments do implement the provisions of the UN Convention on the Rights of Health to be free from violence, which are vital rights for the well-being of all children. Equally, particular attention should be given to the role of the Special Rapporteur on the right to education and the recommendations contained in her reports, particularly in these exceptional circumstances. She mentioned to ensure that measures adopted in response to the pandemic do not jeopardize the right to education and not to increase the suffering of the most marginalized. Ms. Kambu rightly indicated in her last report to the Human Rights Council. And we're very lucky that Ms. Kambu joins us today in our panel session, and I really look forward to listening to her, to any developments made since her last report was subjected. So to conclude, I am of the opinion of those who say that humanity, while collectively combating this awful pandemic and its dramatic consequences, should grasp the situation to transform it into an opportunity for us all to rethink our behavior, so it will not happen again in the future. And if it does happen, no one, be it adult or a child, will be left behind when it comes to education. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you very much indeed for this very thought-provoking and informative statement. As you very rightly said, the huge challenge is to devise alternative ways to accessing education. And I think we learned with great hopes and good astonishment of all the efforts made by the UAE, which were prompt and effective measures. And I was not aware that 1.2 million students were put on virtual platforms within the space of 2 weeks. This is extraordinary. And not just that, and that, as you mentioned, there was free satellite services, even for the rural areas, which is a big problem in many parts of the world, including in the developed parts of the world. So this is really, I think, an example for us to, or all other countries to take upon. to draw upon rather, and try to further the right to education despite the pandemic and beyond. So UAE serves as a really good example since 2012, as you had mentioned. I can now give the floor to our next panelist. You yourself mentioned, Excellency, the report of the special rapporteur. So she's here now with us, Dr. Kumbu Bolibari. Mrs. Kumbu Bolibari from Burkina Faso was appointed special rapporteur in 2016 at the 32nd session of the Human Rights Council. She is former Minister of Education and Literacy of Burkina Faso and has consulted widely for various governments and international institutions on the right to education. So she has an extensive knowledge about education as a human right. She presented last year her report to the Human Rights Council on the impact of COVID-19 on the right to education. So, Excellency Dr. Bolibari, UN Special Rapporteur, if I may just bring up a couple of, not questions, but suggestions for you in your statement, which relate to what is the general impact of COVID-19 on the right to education? A question that's on the lips of everybody is the worst still to come in this domain, or are we crossed that spell? So we don't know. So we await your enlightenment on that. And what would be, lastly, your recommendations to states to safeguard the right to education and education as such in the future? Over to you, Special Rapporteur.
Thank you so much for inviting me in this powerful panel. I'm so sorry to be late for a couple of minutes, and to speak after His Excellency for me is really just to add some information and also to confirm what she already said, because His Excellency Lubna Qasim has already give us really the best line in this perspective. I want to share with you strongly three messages. Really, the first one is really just to remember that when we are talking about the right to education, and we are talking about the impact of COVID-19 in the right to education, we have just to remember that before the COVID-19, there was 1 billion of people who are illiterate. That means 1 billion of people who are not meeting their right to education. And in this 1 billion of people, we have really look like 258 who are youth, and also the majority are women, girls, rural area people, poor families, refugees, people who are living with disabilities, and if you, and also who has that means sometimes nomadic people, that means people who has really specific needs. And if you see this structural way, that means it is really a structural way for the right to education for many public, and those inequalities are already there. We just have to remember that, because it is not the impact of COVID-19 who gives those inequalities. They are already there. For accessibility, for adequate provision, for acceptability, but also for adaptability. That means the 4 A's of the right to education, they are not really meeting in many countries. This is very important to say before coming about the COVID-19. now when I'm talking about the impact of COVID-19, this is for me to be sure that we have also in our mind the holistic vision of this impact, because the COVID-19 has an impact in social issues, in the economic issues, but also in really how we are even governing ourselves. And the COVID-19 has a social impact, that means health, education, water, sanitation, hygiene, etc., etc., but also in the economic issues, because it's a problem of a decent life. But it's also, for me, it's also in the political level. You can see many governments are taking decisions without consulting the citizen. And this is also an impact in the political level. For me, we have to have this on our mind. And the recommendations really I want to make in this area, it is already made by His Excellency, and I want to really to thank her for that. I just want to highlight some. One recommendation I have really mentioned in my report, it is to say that we need for the whole society to be sure that we are able to talk together and to build a new paradigm of education, giving a whole and also having a social contract between the society, people who are living in the same area. Because this is, for me, is very important to policymakers, to talk to citizens, to communities, to listen to teachers, to listen to learners, but also to listen to civil society people, but to listen also, for me, researchers, because you know, with the artificial intelligence, the big data today, and the research, pedagogical, the new area of pedagogy, we have really skills and knowledge, and we can take those knowledge and those skills to use it for the perspective. But we have to talk together. That means, for me, it's very important that the society in each country, they put a mechanism of consultation and dialogue. This is very important to build a new vision for education, but education to be linked with the other sector, and because the rights are interdependent. The right of health or the right of decent life. Today we are talking about the ICT, how to use the ICT. But if you haven't a good house, how can you find a space to help those kids to listen well, or to use the laptop, or the problem of electricity? You know, this is, for me, this is all those things have to be put on the table to discuss and to find the way how to involve the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Economy, the Minister of Rural Development, the Minister of Infrastructure, of Water, of Hygiene, etc., etc. This is very important for me as a recommendation. The second one, I want to say that how to finance the education system. This is also a strong issue. We have really to raise it, because sometimes it is not a problem of the availability of financial resources. It's a problem of how to use, what is the priority people want to use this money and those financial resources. And this has to be really decentralized and well managed with a good accountability system. And for me, this is also very important as a recommendation. The capacity building of teachers and the recognition of teachers, and especially women role in the new perspective. I think this is very important, because we have seen with the COVID-19 how women struggle at home to be sure that they are able to manage kids, to manage the house and everything. and also the violence they have really faced. And this is come out with many actors. And for me, we need also a strong program for mental health to be sure that really we can build the process in the best way. And the last one is really the last one I want to highlight is also the prominence of the private sector. It can be NGOs, it can be the private sector who are making profit, that means profit sector. Those actors, we really need to be sure that they have good information and they have to take care of the human right, and especially the right to education before involving them in the process of education system. Because we are really seeing the private sector and profit organizations, they are really taking a lead in the education system. And this is one thing we have really to take care and to highlight, to be sure that we can build a better world with justice, but also with resilience, to be sure we are all in the best and the good area for living in peace and building societies in peace. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to participate. And yes, it will be all time a pleasure to continue to collaborate with you. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, merci, rapporteur spécial. Thank you very much, Dr. Bolibali, for this excellent and informative analysis in your brief but very, very dense statement. I'm sure quite many of us, I'm the first one to say so, were not aware that even before COVID, 1 billion people, students or children, to take it together, were illiterate. And the majority of them, as you had pointed out, were women, girls, refugees, rural families. So this inequality, of course, in the right to education, access to education, quality education existed much before. I suppose, I gather that COVID-19 exacerbated the inequality, but it was pre-existent. So this is not a new problem, and that you have rightly said has to be borne in mind. Thank you again also for the excellent recommendations that you have made in your report as opposed to the governments. The takeaways are building a new paradigm of education, a new social contract. I think the SG Guterres referred also to a new social contract, because all pandemics and all emergencies bear in themselves the seeds of change, but one has to ensure that it's changed for the better. And that's where, for example, Her Excellency Lubna Qasim's and your Special Rapporteur recommendations come into play, how to build back better, and as the SGS said, leave no one behind. So this contract, as you said, has to be with the citizens, the communities, the learners, civil society. There has to be consultation, dialogue. And I think these are very primordial issues that have to be taken into account to build back better. A second recommendation I think was extremely important is finances. The world lives on finances. I mean, if you don't have the finances, you can't do anything. So, and as you rightly said, it's not a question uniquely of how many millions or billions or whatever, but it is the question of priorities in the use of resources and decentralization. And as you extremely rightly pointed out, especially in the field of human rights, there should not reign a culture of impunity. There has to be accountability to the sovereign, which is not so much the state, but the people in the general Rousseauistic general will sense of the term. And of course, the capacity building. I mean, Geneva Centre is also one of its main pillars of action is capacity building, national capacity building in human rights, advancement, awareness, and protection. So capacity building, especially you underline the specific role of women, which is extremely important. And finally, many of us have this tendency in international organizations to maybe forget about the role of the private sector. We think that's different. But now it has changed with the UN guidelines on human rights and business. But still, this is a reaction, quite normal. And you rightly pointed out that it can contribute a lot to, especially digital education, to take forward the agenda on the right to education. And of course, go towards a society which is more just and resilient. Thank you so very much indeed and if you can stay with us for perhaps a question and answer session, like all panelists. I now have the pleasure to call upon our third panelist, Sugura Mizunoya, who is Senior Advisor on Monitoring and Statistics for Education at UNICEF, headquarters in New York. Suguru's main research interests include economics and education, disability inclusive education, and out-of-school children. He also specializes in data and statistics, and will talk about methodology and data in the field of education and reporting, which is crucial to get to know what is exactly happening and to how many and how. So, sir, could you present the main findings of UNICEF's recent report on COVID-19 and school closures? Among others, you're free to speak about all that you want to speak about. And also, can you briefly initiate us into methodology and data gathering to draft such a report? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Umesh. Let me set up my presentation by sharing screen. I hope you are seeing it right now. All right. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Suguru Mizunoya, Senior Advisor, Statistics and Monitoring for Education, working for UNICEF New York headquarters. Today, I'd like to make a presentation based on the recent publication, the COVID-19 and school closure 1-year mark of the education disruption, which we published at the beginning of the month, and that highlights the impact of COVID-19 on education around the world. Before I start talking about the COVID impact, as mentioned earlier today, I'd like to state some factual figures about the education situation in the world. The first statistics is that 617 million children worldwide cannot read or perform basic mathematics before COVID. And 617 million is about twice bigger than the entire population in EU. The second stat is that 87% or 9 in 10 students in sub-Saharan Africa are considered as learning poor, not being able to read simple sentences. So what these two statistics illustrate is the fact that we are facing global learning crisis. Now, due to COVID, almost all the countries introduced school closure policy to prevent the spread of the virus. Around April 2020, about 1.6 billion students in more than 190 countries were affected by school closure policies. Various governments try to provide remote learning opportunities for students so that they can continue to learn at home. However, our study that was published last year, around last summer, showed that about 1/3 of the students globally from pre-primary to upper secondary schools were not able to even access to these broadcast-based and internet-based remote learning, simply because they don't have the home assets such as radio, TV, computer, internet, even power at home. If you look at certain segments of the population, and so then even if the government provide remote learning, they are not able to access to these services. World Bank estimated that COVID pandemic could result in a loss of 10 trillion US dollars in lifetime earning for these students affected by the COVID pandemic. Our study aimed to understand the impact of school closure after 1 year since the pandemic using two major data sets. One is the survey of national education responses to the COVID-19 school closure. It's a joint survey among UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank that collected data from more than 150 countries. Another main data set is the data on number of students from UNESCO UIS statistics of institute. So the joint study data cover from March 11th last year to February 2nd this year. So it's almost entire 1 year. We followed UNESCO school closure status. When most of the schools are closed, the country schooling status is coded in the data as fully closed. In our report, we also identified countries where students missed almost all the instruction time, when students had 10 or less days of face-to-face instruction and 12 days or less for partial closures last 11 months. For our analysis, the academic breaks and weekends are not considered towards the instruction days. So we were trying to see the real impact of school closures on the number of days that students were supposed to have last 11 months. Now, here is our key finding globally. Globally, on average, schools for 95 million students were fully closed. Schools for additional 62 million students are partially closed. So they had access to face-to-face instruction, but sometime last year, they were not able to have instruction at home. So that's a huge number to start with, but I'd like to show regional disaggregation. There are large regional differences in terms of how much schools are closed and how many children are affected. When you look at the left two regions, which are Latin America and the South Asia, the vast majority of schools are closed, has been closed even today. In the middle of the chart, you see regions with mixed policies among full school closures, partial school closure, and face-to-face school closures. So in this chart, red means full school closure, yellow means mixed, which is the partial school closure, and blue means schools are fully opened. So North America on your right is a region which is consists of USA and Canada applied partial closure. So basically all the students have access to partial school closure. And on your right-hand side, you see the global average. So if you look at the global figure, the biggest, the tallest bar is red bar. That means the vast majority of students have been facing school closure issues last 11 months. When you look at the country level data, you will see that the very serious situation in some countries. Many countries in Latin America and South Asia closed schools for almost entire academic year. As you can see, some countries have closed schools more than 200 instruction days. Right. Now, the question that I have for you is that while students are supposed to learn at home, did they themselves have access to internet-based learning opportunities? Were they able to learn? School closure may be fine if children have access to alternatives. Now, I'd like to show that this chart, which is a little complicated, but basically dots represent countries, and the size of the dots represent the size of the countries, number of students, and different colors represent different regions. On your x-axis, or horizontal direction, is representing the share of children who live in a household with internet. So if you go to the right, you are looking at countries that have most of the students have internet at home. On your left-hand side, you are looking at countries where children or students don't have internet at home. The y-axis or vertical direction shows the length of the school closure, right? So if you go up, that means the longer school days were closed. And if you go down, then the schools were not closed. So here on your right, lower right-hand side, you are seeing a group of countries which were less affected, I would say, by school closures, because these countries' school closure duration were short, and the children were living in a household with internet. However, you see a cluster of countries, and some of them are very large, where the children are living in a household without internet, and the duration of school closure was very long. So by looking at this chart, you see that it's not just school closure that affected education of students globally, but also other aspects of their life, or the household characteristics, or the society also interacted with that. When the students don't have access to these technologies or the asset at home, there is no way for them to continue to learn or continue to receive quality education. Right, so I'd like to close with the key takeaway message. The first one is that it was really too many countries have opted to keep schools closed for more than nearly a year. Right. The second point is that many countries failed to provide high quality internet-based remote learning. I didn't show the result using the other broadcast assets such as radio and TV, but the results are basically the same. Lots of students were faced school closures, but many of them didn't have access to these remote learning. The third point is that schools are essential for children's learning, health, safety, and well-being, and children cannot afford another year of school closure. No effort should be spared to keep schools open or prioritize them in reopening plans. So with these 4 conclusions, I'd like to finish my presentation, and you can see a full report if you can visit this website. I'm sure my presentation will be shared with the participants later. Thank you very much for today and this opportunity.
Thank you very much indeed, Suguru, for this extremely informative intervention, which offers us a detailed statistical view of the COVID-19 impact on education through school closures and internet availability issues. It really brings home the complexity of the problem and the dimension of the challenges that lay before us. Thank you very much indeed. I now pass on the floor to our 4th panelist, Emma Wagner, Senior Education Policy and Advocacy Advisor at the well-known NGO, international NGO, Save the Children. She holds responsibility for education in emergencies and refugee education. In response to the pandemic, Emma also leads on global policy for the Save Our Education campaign. Throughout 2020, she was a member of the Executive Committee on Education Cannot Wait and chaired the ECW's Civil Society Group. She's also a member of the Advocacy Working Group of the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies and a member of the Global Campaign for Education and the Moving Minds Alliance, which advocates for early childhood development for displaced children. Thank you, Emma, for joining us on this panel. Just a couple of maybe issues that you might wish to address in your intervention, your statement. What is the impact of COVID-19 on refugee education or education for refugees? And what would be your recommendations in this field during and also, very importantly, after the pandemic? Over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed for that lovely introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be joining you today. I'm just going to share my presentation. Hopefully you can see that. Okay. As was mentioned, in response to the pandemic, over a year ago now, Save the Children launched the Save Our Education campaign, which has 3 main pillars, which are firstly, keeping education alive while schools are closed and a real focus on distance learning, the safe return to school, and building back better, more inclusive education systems. So a year on from the start of the pandemic, we know that the most marginalised children, including refugees, have been worst hit. COVID-19 has compounded existing education inequalities that prevent refugee children from fulfilling their right to a quality education. Almost half of all school-age refugees, 3.7 million children, were out of school even before the pandemic. Access to education for refugees varies significantly from country to country and within countries. And refugee girls, particularly adolescent girls, are almost 3 times more likely to be out of school than their non-refugee peers. And even if refugees are in school, alongside their host community peers, they're frequently not learning and getting good learning outcomes, putting their development and learning and well-being at risk and causing high dropout rates. Displaced children may have experienced severe trauma and require psychosocial support in schools and referral to specialised services. And whilst early care, childhood care and development in emergencies, alongside parent and caregiver education, is increasingly recognised in providing life-saving support, analysis from the Moving Minds Alliance shows that it's just received 3.3% of all development aid in 2017. And the large majority of countries that host refugees have education systems that already struggle to meet the needs of the most marginalised children. And these countries need additional support from the international community to scale up education services and provide alternative education opportunities for refugees. So a child's right to education, as we all know, is enshrined in international humanitarian law and numerous conventions. And in 2018, the Global Compact on Refugees included the landmark global commitment to provide more direct financial support and special efforts to be mobilised to minimise the time refugee boys and girls are out of education, ideally only a maximum 3 months after their arrival into a new country. And this commitment also included provision that refugees should be included in national education systems and national education sector plans. And this was a really critical commitment, a new commitment made at that time. And so we were really excited to have this new opportunity around this commitment. And if it's fulfilled, could have a huge impact on children's lives. So with the Global Compact on Refugees in 2018 agreed, there was then the first Global Refugee Forum in December 2019, just over a year ago now, and there were many pledges made in support of the commitments in the Compact. And progress on refugee education was really in sight. Education was one of 6 areas of focus at the forum, and it really stole the show because it had hundreds of commitments, policy and financial pledges made. And yeah, as you can see here, 228 pledges referenced education, and many of those focused on ECD, primary and secondary. So 1 year on from the Global Refugee Forum in January, we published a new report, which is called Progress Under Threat, Refugee Education 1 year on from the Global Refugee Forum and the Impact of COVID-19. And this report really looks at the progress made on pledges, or the lack of progress, and the impact of COVID-19. And it shows that just 9% of pledges have been fulfilled on education. You can see there are others, many more that are in progress and some that are still in the initial planning stages. So what we can say from this is that pledges have really been impacted by COVID-19 for a number of different reasons. And our report includes 10 country case studies, and our analysis shows that progress has been very disrupted by the pandemic. And overall, the pandemic has decreased refugees' learning outcomes and their well-being. When refugee children were in school, obviously they've been, with school closures, their education has been really disrupted, and they've really had very many challenges accessing distance learning, as we've already heard, but lack of access to different kinds of learning modalities, be it paper-based materials, radio, online, TV, and so on. They've also had family incomes has also reduced during this time. So families are less likely to send their refugee children back to school, leading to increased dropouts. And in many countries, refugees were actually excluded from the national COVID-19 education response plans, at least in the initial phases of the response. So our evidence demonstrates that this has led to increased rates of child labour, gender-based violence, sexual exploitation, child marriage, and child pregnancy amongst refugee communities. At the same time, there has been some innovative responses to the pandemic in order to meet refugee children's learning and wellbeing needs. So a range of different learning, distance education learning modalities have been used in some countries to reach refugee children, some of which are listed here. There's also been better integration between child protection and education sectors in response to school closures, taking a whole of child approach to recognising the many ways that schools respond to children's needs, not just their learning, but the psychosocial support that they need, the food, the school meals that they get every day, and trying to respond in a kind of multi-sectoral way. Provision of mental health and psychosocial support has been done through new platforms, including online, where it's been available, and WhatsApp. And because of home learning, parents and caregivers have been given guidance and tools to help support their children with their learning at home. There's also been additional funding provided by some multilateral actors, such as Education Cannot Wait and the Global Partnership for Education, which have really targeted countries with large refugee hosting populations to ensure that they can respond with distance learning, improving water and sanitation in schools, and health messaging. So, but with all of this in mind, what we know is clear is that schools are not back to normal, and we're likely to see that schools continue to open and close over the next year as the virus spreads in different ways. And this really disrupts the education for refugees. Our report sets out a number of recommendations for the Global Refugee Forum process, also for refugee hosting countries and donors, to ensure we don't lose sight of the promises we made back in 2018 in that Global Compact. In particular, I really wanted to highlight that the international financing response to COVID-19 has really been dismal. Urgent funding is urgently needed, international funding, but also governments must maintain or increase their education budgets. Refugees must be included in national education systems and in the COVID education response. And governments should provide additional support that refugees need to access distance learning and to a return to school safely, such as learning materials, ed-tech devices, cash transfers, back to school campaigns, mental health and psychosocial support. A child's right to education does not end in emergencies or if you're in a protracted crisis. Refugees have a really critical need for safe, good quality and inclusive education. This is the building block of their recovery and their resilience and long-term development. Refugee children and their families themselves consistently ask for education to be provided to them. It's a high priority for them. We really must act to listen to what they say and be held to account for meeting their right to a quality education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma, for this comprehensive presentation. Indeed, as you said, children's rights to education does not end with emergencies. That's for sure, and that's something that we need to remember. So the whole issue is about keeping education alive during school closures, as you rightly pointed out, and developing and consolidating more inclusive educational systems. And once again, as you said, you referred to the 2018 Marrakesh Compact on refugees, for example, and there's no dearth of legal frameworks, humanitarian law, human rights law, with regard to right to education in all emergencies, humanitarian law, or otherwise peacetime human rights law. But what is most important is implementation and accountability. That's the only way forward. Thank you so much. Allow me now to give the floor to our next panelist, Amélie Mariage, who is co-founder of Apprentices Visualis and Next Generation Fellow at the United Nations Foundation. Amélie founded Apprentices Visuals, a tech for good that has helped more than 1 million children with learning difficulties to access inclusive education worldwide. Amélie has been selected among the most influential young people in Europe by Forbes. And she recently has been selected as Next Generation Fellow by the UN Foundation. So Amélie, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your organization and how with the lockdowns, many students are complaining of having to study online. So what habits of online learning should be kept, in your opinion, and developed further? Over to you, Amélie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And between all these fantastic panelists, I feel super small. And I really like your global vision that you bring about education and children's rights. And I think this is all about what we are doing also in Aprendices Visuales, where we try to reimagining the education by using technology and by using a visual learning methodology. Inspiration come almost 8 years ago after my little cousin was diagnosed with autism. And with him, we've quickly discovered that a tremendous gain have been made in education, but also there is still so much to do, you know, and especially in terms of breaking barriers to access inclusive education. So ever since I have been like involved in education and try to change the system, let's say, and basically was what started at home in a way to help him as a very, very small project has become, after 8 years of work, like a very global response to trying to design like a new inclusive model for education. So as you said, now Aprendices Visuales, it's a tech nonprofit where we created a series of online courses, ebooks, interactive application with pictograms that are like small images. I don't have presentation, but I don't know if you can see. Basically, these are the pictograms, so it can really help the children to learn easily. And so in terms of impact, we already reach 1 million children worldwide because all our material are available for free. They are available in 5 languages. You know, when we started the project, it was something really, powerful for me to do it for free and to give to all the people where needed it. And so you can think, wow, yes, 1 million children, it may seem something really incredible, no? But in fact, as we see it now with the group, when you look at numbers and when you know that there is 2 billion children that have some learning difficulty, it could be autism, dyslexia, hyperactivity, 1 million, it's a very, very small number. So, I mean, working with children, we all know that that's mean really working against time. And I mean by that we really need to boost access to education and access to inclusive education, because otherwise we've probably going to lose, you know, another generation of children that could not access inclusive education. And I mean, this is that we are trying to do in Aprendices Visuales. And I know, I mean, if you have some question or some specific question about the tools, the website, or you can ask me after, okay? And basically to answer your second question about the habit of online learning and what we should keep or what we should develop further. I mean, right now with COVID, we are facing like a global crisis. It's not new and we all know that. And I mean, this crisis is shaping like all the educational system all around the world. And I think there is a good point here, and that is that the reflection about education has never been so global. And I think this is, in my point, the better thing that can happen right now. And basically what's happened with COVID, you know, it's like a large scale social experiment. I mean, in Spain, in France, and almost everywhere, a decision that, and I mean, I saw it with the project talking with some organization. No, normally you have decision on education that can take like a lot of time, months, years. And basically with COVID, like years of deliberation and what we have to do to change the system were passed in matter of hours and minutes. And so for everyone, everything, it was like a big change and everything just go online. And the fact is that, I mean, is at place like a very big spotlight on the critical need that all the students that have access at home to devices or internet and connectivity. It's not, I mean, not all the people are granted with that, you know. And I think this is the big point of, it's not about just school closure, it's also about access to devices and access to internet, because if everything go online, I mean, a lot of family and here in Spain, you know, it's, I mean, and everywhere in the world, you have family that just have one device for a family of 4 children. So do you manage it? And I think there is a big challenge right now on trying to close the digital gap and really to ensure that there is an internet connection for everyone. And I mean, I love technology, no? But and try to make technology accessible for everyone and make that all the device and all the accessibility can be really, you know, universal and accessible for everyone. And I mean, on the optimistic side, what we've seen in school from Spanish perspective, okay, what we've seen is like an increase of recognition on online learning, and that online learning can also break barriers and enhance student education. But on the pessimistic side, the rush to come online without, like, let's say, an adequate preparation can basically lead to very minimal benefit. And I think this is what happened here in Spain or France, for example. Like, I mean, effective online learning, not just involve moving lectures online. It's involved like changes the cultures of the school and creating like a real experience that can be online. You know, it's like a new form of interaction. So I think that, and to close, no, in order to progress toward like the optimistic scenario, I hope so, I think we need to stop thinking about online versus or again face-to-face, but to try to think a solution where both are coming together and using the power of both of them. And I mean, it's really difficult to predict now what education will look like after pandemic or in 10 years, but I think education will just take like different form, and children will be armed with, you know, different device, and will have more opportunity to learn if we go online. But we need, as I said, now to put a focus on closing the digital gap. And I think this is our big challenge right now. And basically, I think that what I saw also, it's that more than technology, you know, because technology, and I really think that is amazing, you know, virtual reality can make learning truly immersive. You have 3D printing where children can bring ideas to life, or machine learning that make learning adaptive and personalized. but we also need to put a focus on soft skill. I mean, like empathy, ethic, critical thinking, imagination, storytelling, or entrepreneurship, because I think they are really, really important. And I think COVID was a big struggle also for children. When your life changed from one day to another, you have parents in Spain almost all their life talking to children, no, you have to go to school. School is really important. And from one day to another, it's like, no, you have to stay home. No, school, it's not even like a good place because there is COVID, and for them, it's really hard also to manage. And we have to listen their emotion too. And so put the focus also on soft skill. I think it's really important, and technology too. And I think that the purpose of education, if we have to reimagine it, it's really to be able to provide all the children an education that makes them feel confident in their ability, and regardless their gender, their race, their condition, if they are refugees or no, or their circumstances, it's all about like making children really excited about the world where they are living in. And I think this is the challenge of education right now. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Amélie, for informing us about the great work your organization is doing in terms of boosting access to education, especially inclusive education, and bringing to our attention the challenge of closing the digital gap. Thank you again. I now give the floor to the last speaker on our panel, Mrs. Madel Kanga, who is the founder of the Jumpstart Group, a network of institutions which seek to harness Africa's demographic divide by fostering entrepreneurship and creating employment opportunities for young people. And the most notable among these institutions is Jumpstart Academy Africa. So Madel, if you could briefly tell us, how does Jumpstart Academy Africa function, and what are the specific efforts taken by yourself and your organization to continue providing education in Africa during the pandemic and beyond? Over to you, Madel.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'll just share a photo quickly. Can everyone see? Okay, awesome. Great. So thank you so much for having me. So the main thing that Jumpstart Academy Africa does, which is part of the Jumpstart Group, is, like Amélie just spoke about, the importance of soft skills. And that's exactly what the focus of Jumpstart Academy Africa is. We looked at the statistics and we saw that using the current model of education across sub-Saharan Africa, almost 61 million children will reach adolescence without the skills they need. So you have, on the one hand, you have students who are not, even completing primary school or secondary school, but then those who actually get past that stage, they don't have the skills they need. So they don't have critical thinking skills. And that is why Jumpstart Academy Africa was born. So what we do is we immerse ourselves in existing schools and we infuse our curriculum, which is based on 21st century skills, making these students job ready so that they are not only equipped to be job seekers, but also job creators. That's very important for us at Jumpstart Academy Africa. How can we teach young people entrepreneurship and empower them so that after they graduate, they can start ventures, start projects, and give back to their communities and create jobs for themselves and lift themselves out of poverty. So that's really our core at Jumpstart Academy Africa, and we've been doing that since 2014. And to see the lives we have changed, the impact, it has been so amazing. We have also expanded. We work in Cameroon primarily, which is where I'm from, and right now we work in Togo as well. So we're really trying to expand across primarily West Africa, French and English speaking, French French and English speaking West Africa. So that's our primary focus, to really, because the education systems across these countries are kind of similar. So we really want to expand into more countries and get our curriculum out there, because it's very critical that young people between the ages of 15 and 19 start learning entrepreneurial skills, start learning critical thinking skills. We don't wait until they graduate and they're 24 and they're looking for jobs, and then we try to start teaching them critical thinking skills. So that is really what we focus on at Jumpstart Academy Africa. In terms of what we did when COVID hit, so COVID hit, and primarily we focus on entrepreneurial skills, soft skills. But then we looked at the statistics in terms of the number of students, as one of the panelists rightly said, was over 1.6 billion students out of school. And that number was frightening. So COVID-19 basically made a bad situation worse in terms of education. And we started noticing some discouraging trends, like with school closures and girls now being out of school. Some of these girls are now being given out in early marriages. So we knew that we had to do something. We had to act quickly to curb the negative effects of COVID-19 when it comes to education. We also noticed disparities between rural areas and urban areas. The government tried, to deploy like learning solutions via TV, but then that has some challenges as well, because some primary school versus secondary school is more, can be suited more to TV and online. How do you engage primary school students via TV? How do you keep the attention? So there's a lot of challenges with the deployment of virtual solutions by the government, and those virtual solutions were mostly in the urban areas. So you have students in the rural areas and who are not really receiving as much attention. So you had a lot of issues and cracks and gaps that COVID-19 and the response to COVID-19 was exposing. So we decided to plug ourselves in that gap and fill a need. So we decided to come up with a program called Keep Learning during COVID-19. And the goal was to have live and on-demand classes for students, primarily between the ages of 14 and 19. So these are students in secondary and high school who are just finishing secondary school, just getting to high school and preparing to graduate and going to university, because this is a crucial stage for them, especially those who are in exam classes. They're already preparing for their final exams, and now they have COVID-19 on top of it. We realized that pressure for young people, and that was the program was tailored around that. So when we started the program, we started through Google Classrooms. And this is another challenge that we realized quickly. Not everyone has access to internet, and the bandwidth, the connectivity that's required for Google Classrooms, some of the connectivity couldn't reach it. So we quickly, again, had to innovate around and think, okay, how can we make this work? We have students, connecting sometimes will take 10 minutes, 20 minutes, students are trying to connect, the teachers are ready to teach, but the students either have one connectivity issue or another. So we moved to WhatsApp groups, and most young people right now, especially across the continent of Africa, have a mobile phone. So that, thankfully enough, WhatsApp groups really was what helped us really drive this program forward. And that was a means of, of teaching the students, of communicating with the students, of keeping in touch with the students, not just in academically, but also personally. Because like I said, a lot of young girls were getting pushed into early marriages. So making sure we give a holistic approach and making sure we keep in touch with these young people and stay connected with their personal and professional development. So that program has been amazing. The results of the program were amazing. 90% of the scholars that registered a pass in the national exams, because we had national exams that still went through despite of COVID. So we're able to get 90% of our students to get a pass in that. And one of the students actually had the highest mark, because the points are rated for the advanced levels. So students who are moving into university, you have 25 points on 25, and he had 25 points on 25. So that was really a testament to show that, we met the students in April of 2020, and in the space of, 8 months, we're able to get them ready for their final exams and get them to a point where they could actually, be on the top of the pack. So for us, that was really amazing. And that just showed us the opportunity, the challenges, like I just mentioned, connectivity problems, the disparities. Some students don't have access to laptops, but there are also immense opportunities. And that's what we're really trying to really hone in on, to look at this as, okay, what is the opportunity and how can we really, this work to be done? There's a lot of work to be done. So we're really looking at it as an opportunity, and that's what we're doing. So we're getting ready for the second phase of the program. Now, most schools have gone back, but still, there's still trickles of some students have been maybe like not being able to go back, financial strain. So we're trying to see how we can be reach out and still be supportive to students and plug in. And the amazing thing about our work at Jumpstart Academy Africa, which is very dear to me, is that most of our schools that we work with are in rural areas, which for me, that's very important. Our first school, which we signed up, was in Du. It's a rural area in Bamenda in Cameroon. And that school has produced some of our brightest students. One of the students from that rural area, she's currently here in the US. She's doing a PhD. So we met this young woman in 2014, and we're 2021, and she's now doing a PhD. So to see how we have changed, a young woman's life, who was in a rural areas where young people, organizations often overlook when they're doing, projects, and to see where she is right now and to give them that opportunity, that for us is something that's very incredible and very powerful at Jumpstart Academy Africa. And that's something that we hope to keep doing, not just in Cameroon, not just in Togo, but across French West and English speaking West Africa. So that's like the end of my presentation. Stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Madel, for your presentation. And we are all praised for the incredible efforts that Jumpstart Academy Africa is undertaking to address such huge and complex challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of what was a very rich panel in all respects, and on an equally vital issue for the future, education. The participants, we have no time now for question and answer session, but send your questions to the Geneva Centre, and we will certainly forward them to the panelists and get back to you with their answers. I will make a very brief comment, very short comments at the end now, on a general note. Education is crucial for the social construction of reality. And education is not about teaching. Teaching is the means. Education is about learning. And there is not enough emphasis on personal education in terms of human values. There is need to cultivate inspiration in students and youth as contributing members of the well-being of society and the planet, not just as pawns subject to market forces with the unique aim of finding jobs. We have to unlearn the assumption that cognitive development is the critical element of education. Emotional and value development must be front and center with real intention. Education is to prepare children and youth for the future. But the future is already here following the pandemic, and the prevailing educational system has not yet entirely fulfilled its fundamental role. Therefore, a transformational, value-driven education is vital for the protection of human rights and the good of society. The Geneva Centre thanks the esteemed panelists for their very valuable contributions and the participants in this panel debate for their interest. This would, I'm sure, go a long way in implementing all the thought-provoking ideas and recommendations made. To this end, I have the pleasure of informing you that the Geneva Centre will issue a publication to be universally distributed on this panel event, containing a summary of the interventions and discussions, as well as a transcription of all statements of the panels. We will do our best to put out this publication by end April. A huge thank you to all, wishing you a safe, fruitful, and enjoyable spring and summer. Bye-bye.
thank you so much, everyone. It was really,
Thank you.
really a
Thank
great
you.
event.
Pleasure.
All the panelists, all the speakers, it was really super interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you too. Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Bye.
See you soon.